One other thing that we're doing now is that we're taking advantage of a technique called overbrightening. Our lighting programming assumes a dynamic range that's double what is effectively there. So you could think of it thinks of lighting in terms from 0 to 511 instead of 0 to 255. During rendering, on our side, we set the hardware gamma ramp so the back half of it, from basically 128 to the end, is saturated to 255s. The front half of it moves at twice the slope that you would expect. So instead of 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 that you would get with an identity gamma, it goes 0, 2, 4. The net effect is this, is that all the textures are doubled in brightness, but you only see the saturation if the texture is at 50% intensity or greater. However, our artwork in general is actually very low intensity. This has been sort of a traditional characteristic of our stuff, is that it is very low intensity. So in order to do this, you have to have the Win32 API of Get Set Device Gamma Ramp. This does work on Win9X, but drivers do not have to implement it. And drivers never implemented it because no one used it. We're using it, so hopefully drivers will implement it. We've gotten on the hardware vendor's case about this, and I believe it actually works pretty much everywhere. It's not difficult for them to implement. It takes like maybe an hour or two for them to do it. But since, anytime Microsoft comes in and says, with this Win32 API, it's completely optional, they're not going to bother. And so as a result, we've gone through and said, we don't require this overbrightening, but it really makes a big difference in just the dynamic feel of the entire world. So everybody hopefully is supporting it. Unfortunately, on NT4, drivers can't support it because when you call Get or Set Device Gamma Ramp, it basically goes to a routine that zeroes out EAX and does a return. It doesn't even call into their driver. So it's very difficult, obviously, for a driver to support that, and we just have to learn to live with it, which is uncool because we develop on NT, so we don't get the cool saturated lighting effects till we go to our Win9X machines. The only weird thing is that since the Voodoo and the Voodoo 2 do not support the Win32 API since they're secondary display devices, we actually had to ask them for an extension, which took them 15 minutes to implement. And so we have a 3D effects extension to modify the gamma, which actually in general is a really nice thing because even if we don't do overbrightening, we can now control brightness. And on 3D effects, that's always been sort of a problem, that there's no real way of anybody controlling the brightness except to go in. I suppose you could do it with Direct 3D, but you could also go into the control panel. But if a user is upset because they can't see anything, then telling them to turn up their control panel brightness, and then the rest of their games turn to white, they're not very happy. So we effectively gain dynamic range in exchange for losing some precision. And where this really shows up is if you walk into shadows, you see a bit more banding. But you get the really nice saturated lighting effects, which I'm sure, like that. So you go from here, from somewhere that's pretty dark, and then you can go out here and it's fairly bright. And we never really had this ability to go between this very bright to very dark. We were either uniformly sort of bright, like with Quake 2, or we were uniformly sort of dark with Quake 1. We just didn't have the dynamic range. Let's see. Oh, bad. This is easier when you have two machines and someone else to shoot at to see this. I'm curious if you can even see that. Bad. Okay, do you see how that shadow flew by? So it's, a pretty cool effect. We really like that. So when you're in this big heated death match and rockets are flying like this and you see people, running around, there's a guy running past you, you shoot, and you see this thing tear around them, and it all, well, in this case, since it's partially environment map, you won't see it as much, but it also lights them correctly. So there's this guy running, or if you're standing up here looking down, it looks just phenomenally cool. Where a guy's running, rockets are shooting past him. As the rocket flies by, he's being brightly illuminated on his right-hand side correctly. Then as the rocket flies by him, the shadow rotates and lengthens all the way around. And that just magically works because of the stencil buffer shadows and the way that we're doing our character lighting. And in addition, so when the rocket hits, you see, the super bright, saturated effect that's going on there. So right there, you can sort of see that being tossed up there. You just spend hours doing this. But like I said, it is fairly grossly expensive, and I don't think you can actually see the lighting that goes on with right there. Hold on a sec. That's kind of hard to see too. Okay. In a wall. Bad. Okay. So yeah, you can sort of see how when the explosion happens on the opposite side, this side gets dark and the other side gets the hell. Oh, jeez. Sorry. Like, my God. What the hell's going on? Oh, speaking of which, so let me show you the specular lighting, which is like amazingly subtle. So there it's like really bright, and if we, well, here, let's go somewhere lucky here. Okay, so they're really bright, very shiny looking, and as you move away from that specific area, it gets brighter. No one ever notices this. But, I mean, that is the definition of complete second order effect. Unfortunately, it is somewhat at a first order price. But, yeah, I mean, sometimes you notice it. I was really surprised when someone actually said, hey, love the specular lighting on the tubey things. I was like, wow, you saw that? Okay.